total eclipse begins as a partial eclipse, as the moon very slowly makes its way in front of the sun. So first it looked like the sun had a little notch in its edge, and then that notch grew larger and larger, turning the sun into a crescent. And it was all very interesting, but I wouldn't say it was spectacular. I mean, the day remained bright. If I hadn't known what was going on overhead, I wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. Well, about 10 minutes before the total solar eclipse was set to begin, weird things started to happen. A cool wind kicked up. Daylight looked odd, and shadows became very strange. They looked bizarrely sharp, as if someone had turned up the contrast knob on TV. And then I looked offshore, and I noticed running lights on boats. So clearly, it was getting dark, although I hadn't realized it. Well, soon it was obvious it was getting dark. It felt like my eyesight was failing. And then all of a sudden, the lights went out. Well, at that, a cheer erupted from the beach. And I took off my eclipse glasses because at this point, during the total eclipse, it was safe to look at the sun with the naked eye. And I glanced upward, and I was just dumbstruck. Now, consider that at this point, I was in my mid-30s. I had lived on Earth long enough to know what the sky looks like. I mean, I'd seen blue skies and gray skies and starry skies and angry skies and pink skies at sunrise. But here was a sky I had never seen. So first, there were the colors. Up above, it was a deep purple gray, like twilight. But on the horizon, it was orange, like sunset, 360 degrees. And up above, in the twilight, bright stars and planets had come out. So there was Jupiter, and there was Mercury, and there was Venus, and they were all in a line. And there, along this line, was this thing, this glorious, bewildering thing. It looked like a wreath woven from silvery thread, and it just hung out there in space, shimmering. Now that was the sun's outer atmosphere, the solar corona. And pictures just don't do it justice. It's not just a ring or halo around the sun. It's finely textured, like it's made out of strands of silk. And although it looked nothing like our sun, of course I knew that's what it was. So there was the sun, and there were the planets. And I could see how the planets revolve around the sun. It's like I had left our solar system and was standing on some alien world looking back at creation. And for the first time in my life, I just felt viscerally connected to the universe in all of its immensity. Time stopped, or it just kind of felt non-existent. And what I beheld with my eyes, I didn't just see it. It felt like a vision. And I stood there in this nirvana for all of 174 seconds, less than 3 minutes, when all of a sudden it was over. The sun burst out, the blue sky returned, the stars and the planets and the corona were gone. The world returned to normal. But I had changed.
And welcome again. It's good to have all of you here as part of the family of God. Welcome to you folks as well who are watching online. It's no mistake that you're here, no accident. So I don't know if any of you know it, but today is March 1st. You probably know that. Yesterday was Leap Day. And this is kind of an important day for me because it was 2 years ago today that I got in my car to go to work, and for the first time, instead of heading west to St. Olaf, I pointed it north to First Lutheran 2 years ago today. I'm glad you can still clap about it. What's more is it's an important day for me because I really feel like I still even more, every day I'm here, I feel like God has called me to this place and has called us to be pastor and congregation. And I really do believe good things are going to happen. Not only have happened, but are going to happen. I mean, look at, we've got all of this brand new technology that still doesn't work right. Isn't that great? Just think of what tomorrow's going to bring. So that was a clip from a TED Talk, and for those of you that don't know what TED is an acronym. It stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. Bet you didn't know that. This started way back 36 years ago, 1984. A couple of guys decided they were going to do this one-time event. They were going to hold this conference, and they were going to invite these very bright, intelligent, articulate people to just simply talk about things that fascinate them and do it kind of in short, punchy segments, 15, 20 minutes. This particular one is 12 minutes long. You should watch it sometime, the whole thing. And so it grew. It grew from this single event into this worldwide phenomena called TED, and they have conferences all around the world. This particular clip took place in July of 2017, and the gentleman's name who was talking, his name is David Barron. And so July of 2017, if that rings a bell for you, that you science buffs, that was just a few weeks before the eclipse came across the United States from Oregon across South Carolina, and David was talking about his experiences with eclipses. So he is a writer, a science writer, and at one time worked for NPR. So this was years before 2017. And he had this assignment where he was to go out and interview an astronomer about eclipses. And in the course of conversation, as he's doing this interview, it comes to light that David's never seen a total eclipse. The best he's ever done is a partial eclipse. And of course, a total eclipse, as you probably know, it's when the moon passes between the sun and the earth, and the sun's light is completely blocked out in a narrow path, just 100 miles wide, along a path for several hours. And it doesn't happen very often, they say that in any one point in the earth, if you stay there long enough, it will happen, but probably take 400 years in between each one. So you got to go to the eclipse to see the total eclipse. And so it comes to light in this conversation that David has never seen a total eclipse. And this fellow says, well, this is very different than what you've seen. You've seen partial eclipse. Total eclipse is the most awe-inspiring spectacle in all of nature. And then he gave David some advice. Before you die, you owe it to yourself to go experience one of these. And so the seed was planted. David learned that a few years later there was going to be an eclipse in the Caribbean over Aruba. And so he and his spouse went to Aruba to experience the eclipse. And the clip that you just saw was his description of not only what happened, but how it affected him. Now, David will tell you that he does not consider himself to be a spiritual person. And in fact, he doesn't believe in God. He says, I wish I did believe in God, but I can't. But did you hear that description? I mean, it just rings and drips with spiritual dimensions. And he speaks about it in terms of this thing that he has experienced as being awe-inspiring, awesome. Awe. Awesome. Awesomeness. It's a word we use way too much. And David points that out a little later in the talk. Because awe should be reserved for the kinds of things that David experienced in the eclipse. And only for those kinds of things. We throw the word around way too often. Awe. A sense of wonder and mystery when you are in the presence of something grand and enormous. And when you are there in the presence of such a thing, everything else is put in perspective. Your world, your life, everything you thought was big has become small because you have seen this thing, this vision, he calls it, this sign that there is something more to life. Now, David's not a religious person, and so when he looks for that kind of solace in his life, that kind of peace, he thinks back to that day in Aruba and those 174 seconds. And it changed the way he saw the world. So much so that now he has become an umbraphile, which is a word he says means eclipse chaser. But if you take the word apart, really what it means is someone who is a shadow lover. Isn't that interesting? And David has become such an umbraphile that now all of his financial resources and all the extra money that he earns goes into a kitty, and he finds out where the next eclipse is going to be on the face of the planet, and he goes there to experience it with whoever will meet him. Because he wants to experience again, just like for the very first time, those 174 seconds of awe and wonder that change his world. Well, let's stop for a moment here and sing. Okay, so this is the first Sunday in Lent, let's just back up here and just assume that maybe some of you have never been to church before, and Lent's kind of a fancy church word that we all throw around, but it's a very simple word. It comes from the Germanic languages, and it's just a word that means springtime. I don't know if you knew that or not, but for us, Lent is also that countdown, a 40-day countdown that's leading up to Easter. And so when I developed this next sermon series, I thought this is perfect. I went to the book of John because there's 6 weeks and there are 6 sermons here. And what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at the miracles, a specific set of miracles in the book of John. They are called the signs. And there are a total of 7 signs. And Shelley, would you please put up the next slide here? And here they are. Let's see if they come. You can kind of see them there, but I wanted to point them out because there's also Bible references on those signs. And a couple of things I want you to notice about them. You can see them there. That's don't worry about it, Shelley. It's good enough. A couple of things I want you to notice about these miracles. That in the book of John, there they are right there. And there are the Bible references for each one. Notice they start with chapter 2. They go through chapter 11. There's 6 of them. I told you there's 7. Hang tight. I'll get to that. All right. But I want you to notice a couple things. First of all, when you look at them, you think miracles. But John doesn't call them miracles. These are not just one-time standalone events and you do them and you're done with them and that's it. They are signs of something bigger that's happening. That even though these things are miraculous, under the surface of these things, a whole new creation is coming out. Something brand new is about to happen, and it's being played out through these 7 signs. All right? So, that leads me to the second thing I want you to notice. I want you to notice, look at those, where the signs occur. And I'm going to do it from last to first. The sign, the inbreaking of God into our world to create something new happens in the death of Jesus' friend Lazarus. It happens in blindness. It happens in hunger. It happens in paralysis. It happens in illness. And it happens when ordinary, everyday life runs dry of blessings. The signs come in the shadows of life. Isn't that interesting? And they come with power. The full power and awesome spectacle of God. Now, I want to stop here because this is important. I think too often we read these things in a sort of domesticated kind of way. We read right over them like, oh, that's Jesus, this stuff happens, it doesn't happen anymore, that's it. But I want you to read it in a different way. I want you to understand it in a different way. Because these things are elements of power. Don't read them as though you've never seen an eclipse before. Because that's not what's happening here. Just take a look at what's happening. Again, from bottom to top. Death is overcome in resurrection. Blindness is brought to sight. And not restored sight, but this blind man has never seen before. And so this is new sight. Sight like has never happened before. 5,000 are fed. Hunger is satisfied. And once again, it's not just one meal, go home, wait a few hours, and you're going to be hungry again. Jesus says that with this meal, when you eat my bread, when you eat my body, you will never be hungry again. You getting this, folks? The paralysis of life in all of its form, released forever. Illness results in health. My friends, these are acts of awesome power. When described in this way, when you see them in this way, don't they inspire a sense of wonder? A sense of awe because you're standing in the presence of something grand and immeasurable? Because that's what they should do. That's what they do. And so the first of the signs, Shelley, you can go on to the next slide if you want. The first of the signs. And this is not only is it the first sign of John's gospel, but it's a perfect place to start for us. And you know the story. Jesus is at a wedding, and it's the third day of a week-long wedding. All right? Those of you who are parents of brides-to-be, you got that? Week-long wedding, food, drink, all the guests for a week. How'd that work for you last fall there?
1 day was fine.
Okay, 1 day was enough. So they're in the third day of the wedding, and the wine runs out. Now, wine in this day and time, and in this culture, it's not just a social lubricant for a wedding. It's really a symbol of the blessing that this family will experience in their married life. And so this isn't just a deal where you go to the pop shop and get some more, Franzia and just keep it rolling. This is an unmitigated disaster because really what's happening is life has run dry and they're only in the third day of their marriage. And so you know the story. Jesus is called into action by his mom, and this is really interesting. So he commands the servants. Whatever he says, Mary, just go do it. Okay? He says that to the servants. Mary says that to the servants. And so he says, see those jars over there? Fill them up with water. This is the interesting part. Those aren't just ordinary jars. Those are jars that are normally used for religious observances. So what they would do is they would fill the jars with water, they would set them in special places, and then before you went to eat or before you did anything, you were reminded of your religion, where you would take some water out of the jar and you would wash up so that you would be purified and clean, so you could go about your bit of business knowing that God has taken care of all of that stuff. And you know, I suppose at one time, in the beginning, those kinds of activities of normal religious life, they had a way of showering blessings on those who performed them, on themselves and with their families. But by the time Jesus gets around, all of that is gone. It's just an outward act, and it is a religion that has gone from blessing to purification. So it's not that God blesses you, it's that you got to be washed and you've got to be right. And so really, more than symbolically, these jars are empty. They are as empty as the wine vats for the wedding. And Jesus says, fill them up. And you know the rest of the story, right? They take the water, dip the water, take it to the steward, and it's not just wine. It is the best wine ever. And the steward doesn't know where it came from, so he goes to the head of the feast and he says, you usually serve the good stuff first, but you've saved the best for last. And now I want you to notice what happens at the end of the story, because this is just choice. This whole thing doesn't take very long. Maybe, let's say, 174 seconds. And then everything goes back to normal. The steward goes, does his job. The head of the feast is executing the wedding. The bride and groom are getting their blessings showered upon them, and they're going to complete the wedding just like nothing ever happened. Everything's back to normal. Except for those who saw behind the scenes what happened and understood what took place. The stewards who poured up the water, and the disciples. And for them, life has forever changed. So you see, this is really the perfect place for us to start, because, you know, I have come to believe that when it comes to the Christian faith, especially in the late 20th century, early 21st century, that we've lost something of the sense of awe and wonder. That we've become these stone vessels that are empty. I mean, in my mind, it's one of the reasons people have stopped coming to church. Because we say and do all the right things, we got the vessels there. But the power of Jesus in what we say and in what we do seems absent to them. Frankly, seems absent to us sometimes. So much so that those who don't come to church anymore, very often they think that Jesus is all about purification. But he's not. He's about blessing. He's about entering into their lives, just like he's entered into your life and just like he's entered into my life, with signs and wonders that are so awe-inspiring. They are so enormous and so grand that they change the course and direction of who we are and what we do and how we live our lives. Let's sing. So I'm going to make a suggestion to you that we in the church are umbophiles. We are shadow lovers. Because we know that it's in the shadowy portions of our life that this is where God brings his miracles and shows us signs that a new creation is breaking into our world. And I want to close with a couple of stories. The first one's a very personal story, something that happened to me a few years ago, but frankly, it keeps playing itself out over and over again. This was back in Storm Lake, and one night I was called out to someone who was dying. And so I went to the house, and he was upstairs in his bedroom, and he was having a little pain, so kind of moving around a little bit anxious, was not speaking anymore, but he could certainly hear everything that was going on, and he knew who was around him. And so I held his hand, the family gathered around, and we prayed, and then we sang. Sing with me. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. Did you hear that? A prayer. One of the vessels of ordinary religious life. A song as old as time itself. We know it by heart. Another vessel of ordinary religious life. And Jesus was there. And he said, fill it up. And after the prayer, the man calmed, took 2 breaths, opened his eyes, and went home. And every time that happens, I am so glad that I am an umberphile. Now, I will tell you that it's not always quite that dramatic. So story 2, less personal story, but something I ran into last week. One of my favorite musicians, and actually I got this musician from my daughters, Kari. Hope you're enjoying the sermon. They're going to a baby shower today, so they couldn't be here. Guy by the name of Ben Rector. And Ben's this, looks like he's a 30-something, and he has been breaking into the music scene for the last several years. And so he did a bunch of records, and he started getting a following, and he's pretty soon it's getting so intense and so good that he's on the road pretty much full time. And what he's doing is he's doing show, and then he takes a little bit of break, and he goes back and he cuts a quick album. And he does it again, show, cuts another album, and it becomes just sort of dry. It becomes stale. It's like it's just kind of going through the motions. You ever feel that way about life? Just going through the motions? Just dry? Just stale? Well, now it comes time for his 6th album. And Ben decides, I got to do this differently. Otherwise, this thing's going to crash and burn, and so am I. And so he made a vow to himself and his new record company. And he said, I want to do this record like it's the very first record I've ever done. And they take their time, and they spread out, and they let it happen. And they record nearly the whole album. They leave space for 1 or 2 songs. And it's kind of working, but it's kind of not. And they get done mastering it, and then Ben goes home, but there's still 1 or 2 songs left because Ben knows that once in a while, after you're done recording, the best stuff comes out. And so there he is in the shadows, waiting for it to happen, and it does. And that's how the song Brand New came to be, which you got to listen to the words. It's just amazing. And this also became not only the title of the album, but it became his breakout single. And he talks about life being brand new, about no longer being afraid. So, the video that he cuts, we'll get to it in just a second. The video that he cuts is just so much fun, and you get the sense of the newness, not only for him, but also for us. Shelley?
My label and management felt strongly that I needed a music video for Brand New, so I spent the budget on flying 6 fans to Six Flags, because roller coasters.
Let's go to Six Flags! I feel like new sunglasses, like a brand new pair of jeans. I feel like taking chances. I feel a lot like 17. I feel like windows roll down new city streets and cabs. I feel like anything can happen, laughing. You take me right back when we were kids. Never thought I'd feel like this. Like when I close my eyes and don't even care if anyone sees me dancing. Like I can fly and don't even think of touching the ground. Like a heartbeat skip, like an open page, like a one-way trip on an aeroplane. It's the way that I feel when I'm with you. Brand new. I feel like a young John Cusack, like making big mistakes. I feel like for the first time in a long time, I am not afraid. I feel like a kid. Never thought it'd feel like this.
There was some concern this wasn't music video-y enough, so we've edited in performance footage.
Like when I close my eyes and don't even care if anyone sees me dancing. Like I can fly and you don't even think you're touching the ground. Like a heartbeat skip, like an open page, like a one-way trip on an aeroplane. It's the way that I feel when I'm with you. Brand new.
Isn't that fun? Feel brand new, like a kid again. For the first time, never been afraid. My friends, take some space with your life. Don't just put one foot in front of the other. Go find that 100-mile path in your life where the eclipse comes and the stars appear and the sky looks like it's never looked before. Go find that place in your life where ordinary things, everyday things always occur, and look at those things and those people in a brand new way. For Christ is there. He has entered into this world, and he comes for you to take this old, tired life and transform it into the new creation of his resurrection. And for that we give him thanks and praise. Amen.